guard. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a long-standing debate among historians as to whether history is shaped by vast impersonal forces or by individual men and women. President Zelensky's magnificent leadership shows us that individuals matter. So we are delighted to have him address us today. Mr. Zelensky, we first got a sense of your character as a wartime leader in that first weekend of the war when you were offered safe passage out of Ukraine, and your response echoed around the world. I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. We are now at a critical moment in the war, so we are very grateful that you have made time among all your other duties to speak to us and take some questions from our audience and from me. Thank you, Mr. President. It is my signal honour to invite you to address the Lowy Institute.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Lowy, Mr. Folilov, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you for this opportunity to address you today and to answer some of the most pressing questions of our time. A time that has such a strong connection with the past. Almost 8 years ago, in November 2014, I was here in Sydney, in your Sydney, at the Lowy Institute. Angela Merkel, then the Federal Chancellor of Germany, gave a speech. And in her speech, she touched upon the topic of the Russian war against Ukraine, this illegal annexation of our Crimea, the hostilities in the Donbass, and the shutdown of the Malaysian Boeing in the sky over Ukraine. Now, Ms. Merkel then noted that Ukrainian crisis is far more than a regional one. In fact, all of us. Now, let me remind you once again, these words were spoken almost 8 years ago. That is 8 years before Russia was able to turn a hybrid war against Ukraine into the war. Not a crisis, but a full-scale aggression unseen for Europe ever since the Second World War. Now, why was this possible? Why, despite the realization back in 2014 that Russian aggression is not something local, but a global threat, still, Russia had the possibility of such an escalation that started on February 23rd this year. Now, this question reveals the connection between our time and even more ancient history, with a history that still hasn't become, well, a history literally, yet it's still with us. It's in the present. On September 30th this year, Russian leader announced the alleged annexation of the part of territory of Ukraine, over 4 of our regions, and still having some of Russian occupation contingent. This new attempt by Russia to grape someone else's property is an obvious attempt to repeat what happened in 2014, that is to repeat Crimea. It's not just annexation as such. Russia is trying to put the international community under such conditions so that the response to yet another Russian crime against international law would fail to correspond to the severity of such crime, just as it was in the case with Crimea. In 2014, we have not seen the truly tough sanctions against Russia. It was not punished for the crime. At the time, there was a very strong desire among many in the world to close their eyes to the Russian, to consider the war being simply a crisis and to preserve relations with Russia. Although they said that the threat was global, they acted as if this was something purely local, calling it the reason for higher aggressors' sense of impunity would be an understatement. But this always happens. When a criminal does not receive an adequate punishment for a crime he has committed, he perceives it as a permission for further criminal acts. They are weak. Now, this is how the aggressor reacts when he feels no response. Now, does he feel it now? Knowingly or not, but Russian leader chose a very symbolic date to start this very attempt to annex our territory, September the 30th. The 30th. Now, this day takes us back 84 years in the history of Europe and the world. It was on this day that another aggressor, but similar to this one, succeeded signing the Munich Agreement to annex someone else's territories. Now we remember this agreement under the name of the Munich Conspiracy and consider it an example of political cynicism and a fatal mistake, a mistake that took tens of millions of lives. But signing of Munich went with different assessments and evaluations. Some would say that the agreement would give peace to the generation of that time. Different countries, different voices, but still there's this thesis that you can simply agree that the aggressor is seizing something, taking something once again, that it is possible to draw some kind of conditional line somewhere that will satisfy Russia's appetite, and supposedly after that the war will stop. And it is not worth responding violently to this annexation attempt which Russia started on September the 30th. But these theses, these statements brings us back to 2014, the mistakes of the then leaders. It brings us back to 1938. It only says that the criminal can go unpunished. And so it offers a temptation for this criminal to continue. Now be sure, the leader of Russia is now carefully analyzing the world's response to the sham referenda on Ukrainian soil and on the announcement of the annexation of our territory. Now what exactly is he looking at? It's very simple. He's interested whether he still has a potential to escalate. If the world's response is weak, then Russia will come up with a new escalation. You see that the spectrum of illegal actions of this country is very wide. Missile terror, mass murder, deportations, nuclear blackmail, and the captured Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, food crisis, there's energy crisis as well, and this recent sabotage of gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea was also very eloquent. These are actions that can destabilize the life on the entire continent. This is the energy weapon of a mass destruction. Like every country in the world depends on underwater cables and pipelines, which can be destroyed by an aggressor in the same way as gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. Therefore, the world must now show strength. The strength is required to finally put an end to this aggression and to the aggressor's ability to further escalate. On international platforms, there's a need for clear and straightforward condemnation of Russia for their attempt to annex Ukrainian territory, so that it would be so much different from what happened in 2014. At the level of states and unions of states, there's a need for new and tough sanctions against Russia, so that the situation would be once again very different from 2014. At the level of cooperation with Ukraine, these regular demonstrative support packages are required, primarily defensive and financial, so that the aggressor would see that his illegal actions only complicate the situation for him. Now, it's a time that has such a strong connection to the past. We have a historic opportunity to set a precedent that will turn the history of aggression into the history, and that will teach any aggressor that no crime against international law will ever again be left unpunished. Now, next week, the UN General Assembly will consider a resolution of non-recognition and condemnation of another attempt to annex their territory by Russia. We in Australia have long had effective cooperation at all international platforms, and in particular the UN. And we must now direct our joint efforts in a way to make the vote at the General Assembly for this resolution as unanimous as possible. I'm asking Australia to use all of its influence to convince as many countries as possible not to remain neutral and to vote for international law and against the Russian annexation. Ukraine has a very meaningful defense cooperation with Australia. And after my first address to the Parliament and people of Australia in March, your government decided to provide Ukraine with Bushmasters, and we are very grateful. These equipment has performed masterfully in real combat operations. And the more weapons and ammunition we receive, artillery, drones, anti-aircraft defense, anti-tank, anti-ship weapons, the more Russia would feel the responsibility for violating international law. And last, the aggressor will feel that he allegedly has room for any escalation. The third element is sanctions. I thank the Australia for participating in this global effort to impose sanctions on the aggressor for this war. But this pressure makes sense when it is constantly growing and when the aggressor does not have time to adapt to the sanctions, does not have time to find ways to circumvent those sanctions. Now is the time to increase this pressure. Right now, when Russia has staged this sham referenda and staged this annexation, the price of such actions must be tangible and the consequences must be tough. The aggressor should have no illusions that 2014 can still happen once again. And the last but not the least, the world has seen many wars. Wars somewhere in one part of the world affected everyone globally. And it's not only about the direct negative impact of the war, but the impact of its consequences and results. If the aggressor achieves a result for himself, the one he wants, if the aggressive ambition is satisfied, then such a result would affect everyone in the world, even more and even longer than the war itself. It would affect with cynicism, with the inevitable destruction of international law and truth. That is why the illegal war must end with the fair and tangible defeat of the one who started that war. The aggressor must lose. This is what gives peace to generations, and not the any attempts of conspiracy with the aggressor, not the appeasement of the aggressor, but making sure that he would lose. And Ukraine must win. This is not just something about our country. It's about all of us in the world. It's about Australia as well, about your freedom, about your safety, about our common values, and about our common peace. And our victory can historically reinforce that. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for the support to Australia, and glory to Ukraine.
Mr. President, thank you for those important remarks, which will be studied carefully in Europe and around the world. Thank you also for agreeing to take our questions. For the first question, I'd like to go to the chairman of the Lowy Institute, Sir Frank Lowy.
Thank you, Mr. President, talking to us. I am a survivor of the Holocaust, and I do remember when Ukraine was overrun by the German army. I also remember when the Soviet Union, in return, overran your country. And then you had a few years of freedom of your own. Now you have been attacked by the Russian army again. Where do you personally, and where does the nation get the strength, the courage, and the determination to win again freedom for Ukraine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question. And with all due respect to you and your path, and this path that was taken by so many people, unfortunately, this is a historical path. But yet it's a path of victory over Nazism. What is the source of my strength? Well, when I see people like that, when I talk to people like that, when I understand what they have overcome in their lives, we don't have, the right to, to say pity words and stop at certain moments. But then we have these words, never again, and we stay resilient with this. And it's not a question actually of a territory or of any country or any nation, but it's a question of a very horrible and bloody action or event. And today this action or event is happening all around us. And its manifestations are there in those tortures, in those rapes and the killings of our people. We have no right to be weak. We cannot afford ourselves to rest. Because we know, and this is a historical experience, you perfectly realize this, because as long as he will conquer one nation, he will go next. He will go for other nations, because unfortunately he consumes other peoples, other territories. This is what feeds him. That is why I've paid so much attention to the strength position of the united world and united Europe. And, there's this motto, if not we, then who else? So, today, this motto has a manifestation in Ukraine. So now we have to remain a strong point, a protection for those values. Now, where do we take, as a nation, those forces? It's a historic moment. Ukrainians has always fought for their independence. For many ages, we fought for independence, many times. And I guess there's this historic chance that we have to fight for our independence, to have this independence. We never wanted to have this war. We always searched for peace. I mean, we have had this independence for 31 years. We've restored our independence. We always realized that we have restored this without the war, and we understood that the risks are there, because we know those examples from the world's history, particularly in terms of the fact that many countries have received their independence through wars. That's right, that's the fact. So maybe this is something that we're taking from our ancestors, from our history, and from the fact that we don't have any other option to take.
Mr. President, let me ask you a couple of questions, if I may. In your remarks, you mentioned nuclear blackmail. Mr. Putin told us the other day that he's not bluffing. So may I ask you, do you believe that the likelihood of the use of Russian nuclear weapons against Ukraine has risen? And what more do you want NATO to do to deter Russia from using nuclear weapons?
Thank you for this question. Well, capturing of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is it also stands for a fact for using that for a nuclear blackmail and for exerting pressure on the world and Ukraine. And I believe that's already a nuclear blackmail, and now there's situation with the energy. Look at this from the point of security and from the pragmatic standpoint, and you would see that it's a blackmail, it's a crisis. And speaking of security, all the nuclear blocks are being deactivated. There's 500 mercenaries currently located in the facilities of the nuclear power plant. There's heavy weaponry in the facilities directly. All of the mercenaries have explosives, have small arms directly inside the nuclear power plant. And they're holding the technical personnel as hostages. They're taken there as hostages, as I've said, so the blocks are deactivated. We don't have electricity from that nuclear plant. And since we don't have the demilitarized nuclear power plant, we do have risks because there's 6 nuclear blocks. I mean, this is 6 blocks the size of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and that's why there could be explosions. That's already the use of nuclear weapons. So what the nuclear blackmail is about, that you can blackmail, I mean, you're not using the weapons, but you can still blackmailing others by saying that or by not having nuclear power plant working for the people. I mean, the people are not receiving the electricity. Now can produce a significant crisis, not only for Ukraine, but for the Europe as well. And I'm going to the second part of my answer. It's about pragmatic aspects. We've connected to the European grids, so we can, in these difficult and turbulent times, during the times of harsh winter, we can provide a lot of cheap electricity to Europe. And we are providing that electricity now to Ukraine, but everyone clearly understands, and there's this estimations and calculations that the longer they would occupy this power plant with deactivation of our nuclear blocks, they understand that at a certain point of time, we would need to disconnect and to not provide electricity to Europe, because we won't be able to do so, because we will have insufficient electricity for heating our homes. And this time is coming closer. This is a great risk. And it's not about months, really. When I'm telling things like that, I really understand what is happening. We are talking about the risks. This could be months, but this could be days or weeks. And speaking about the use of other nuclear weapons, it's hard to say. They hardly control everything that is happening in their country, just as they're not controlling everything they have on the battlefield. They wanted to capture us, like in 3 days. This is something that you've mentioned in your statement, but they failed. They didn't know what to try to do, whether to attack, whether to conquer, or to, I don't know, rob another house with whatever it has. So they've looted, they killed, they raped people. And the same is happening in their own policy, absolutely the same. And the very same is happening in their economy. These poor people and then wealthy state, and they will protect their wealth. And we can already see that these people are capable of committing such grave steps. Now, what the NATO has to do to prevent and deter the use of nuclear weapons by Russia. But what's important, and I have to underline that once again in my statements to the international community, preventive strikes, the preventive action, so that Russia would knew what would happen to them, and not in return, I mean, waiting for the nuclear strikes first, and then to say what's going to happen to them. No. There is a need to review the way the pressure is being exerted. So there is a need to review this procedure, so to say. Thank you.
Let me ask you, Mr. President, about what this war tells us about Russia. We've learned a lot from this war about Ukraine, but what does it tell us about Russia? Mr. Putin launched the war to show Russian strength, but in fact he's telegraphed Russian weakness. We see that weakness in Russia's shambolic mobilization. We see it in the fact that one day Russia illegally annexes 4 of your regions and the next day it loses ground in each of them. What does the war tell us about the brittleness and weakness of authoritarian states like Russia?
Я думаю, що ви в своєму питанні і
I think
відповіли на своє.
you gave
Я вважаю, що
an answer to your question in the statement of your question, because I believe that the authoritarian regime
напевно швидше діяти,
is
ніж будь-яка
capable of
демократія у світі.
acting faster than any democracy in the world.
Швидше
It can faster conquer, open fire, well,
рота, закривати
close the media or control the journalists, control the freedom of speech. It can respond faster because one person is capable of responding faster than through discussion. Democracy is a dialogue. It's a discussion. And it's not about like two people. It can be a wide circle of people sharing their own opinions, and not everything is that clear. So democracy always produces some sort of bureaucracy. Why? Because everything has to be balanced. You have to take everything thoroughly. So that's what it stands for. Autocracy. Because there is no other opinion. Now, that's what makes the autocracy so brisk. That's what brings the risk to the whole world. Because the autocracy, it results in the loss of the regime, and the loss of the statehood, and the loss of the history, and the loss of the geopolitical influence. And this is what is happening in Russia once again. So they were capable in a couple of days to kill a lot of Ukrainians, but they're not capable of holding their ground and holding their control of our territory. We're not that small country that they can eat in one day. They can kill, but they cannot survive. So this is what this tells us about. So Ukraine has an absolutely different approach, a democratic approach. Yes, maybe we were not expecting that things like that could happen to people. There could be tortures like that, that the people are capable of committing things like that. But we needed some time, a small period of time to realize that now we have to get united and to forget all these narratives that this is the second army of the world and they're far greater than us in terms of the territory. They have 5 times the population of Ukraine, that they're this big Russia. But to concentrate rather on the fact that we are a great nation. We are fighting for ourselves. In this very moment, we are fighting for our families. And this is what brings the strength to democracy. We are not fighting for some Tsar or the emperor, not for the comfort of a single person, but we are fighting for our homes, for our rights. And this is what brings our freedom, and this is what brings our strength. And so even if he would decide to launch a nuclear strike, well, what can I say? I think the world will never forgive this and will never forgive this to this territory, to Russia. And I believe that this directly ahead of Russia. I think he loves his own life. And I think he clearly understands that after the use of the weapons, he would be unable anymore to preserve, so to say, his life. And I'm confident of that.
Thank you. Mr. President, I have a question from a journalist, Laura Tingle from 730. Laura asks, she says, last week you formally applied for Ukraine to join NATO. Have you received any response to date? Do you expect the alliance to act quickly on your response, and how would it change things for you if they did?
Це питання знов-таки,
Well,
про яке частково ми говорили.
this is the question that we've partially covered. You don't need to be afraid of anyone.
І, напевно, навпаки, треба
I think it
будувати
has to
такі
be all the way
гарантії безпеки
different.
для всього
And you
світу,
need to build the security guarantees for the whole world so that nobody would have even a thought to become autocratic. And even if you are already autocratic, then you shouldn't have even a single thought that you can conquer the other territories or other nations. And for that, you must have to be united. And I think that without Ukraine, the NATO is not such a strong alliance, particularly the European continent. And this is what we can see. We know what neighbors do we have, what risks do we have. And I believe for the strength in the east of Europe, this is a very important step. We can offer this chance to NATO. We are grateful for their support to NATO. But we are giving this opportunity at a very important moment. Not only the Ukraine has to demonstrate its strength to Russia, but the alliance has also to demonstrate that they are not afraid of Russia. So it's a question to NATO, but I know that everyone realizes that security guarantees for Ukraine are something that is necessary, and I think we are on that path. We shall definitely take this path, and how fast it's going to be, unfortunately, it depends not only on Ukraine.
Mr. President, let me ask you a question about a positive topic, if I can. I was delighted to see your tweet today reporting that Ukraine is linking arms.
Well, before that, the questions were also positive, so
Yes, that's true.
About this.
Yes, but this is about football. This is about football, Mr. President, so this is really positive. Let me ask you about your tweet that Ukraine is joining with Spain and Portugal to bid for the 2030 FIFA World Cup. There are a lot of football fans here at the Lowy Institute. So, Mr. President, let me ask you, how important is it for Ukrainians to have something like this that they can look forward to for after the victory?
Я вважаю, що це вже говорить про впевненість України.
It already stands for our confidence in the victory. And we, as an independent European state, would be hosting at a very high level the World Championship in football. I believe this is a very important signal. It motivates our people, it motivates our soldiers. I think that's the right way. On the other hand, the world and our colleagues in Spain and Portugal and the world, it's important for them that they're accepting an invitation or an offer from us. It stands for the fact that the world also understands and believes that Ukraine will remain an independent country with such a wonderful perspective of hosting the World Football Championship of 2030.
All right, and we intend to be there, Mr. President. We're going to be in the stadium with you. Let me ask you a final question, if I can. In July, Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, visited you in Kyiv. What did you take from that meeting? How else can Australia help you? You've mentioned diplomatic influence at the UN, sanctions and Bushmasters. I know you guys like Bushmasters. What else can Australia do to help Ukraine?
Well, first and foremost, I need to respond to this desire to come to our football stadium. So it's great. Please come. And it's important for us. And I have to be frank. After the war, after having this victory, we need to restore our country. Maybe not over a single year, but over a number of years. And we would need to develop tourism. So please, you're very welcome in Kiev, in Ukraine, to support us, even economically. That's very important. Now, speaking of Australia, we had a wonderful meeting with the Prime Minister and his team, and we talked on different aspects and on assistance, not only of humanitarian assistance, but assistance to our armed forces and security package. And I have to say that indeed Australia helps us a lot, both in terms of Bushmasters and other things. And those Bushmasters, they really help on the battlefield because they preserve the lives of our soldiers on the ground. And there's also a significant package that Australia has been preparing and has been transferring to us. This process is ongoing as we speak, and I'm very grateful to that. I don't want to go into details on what weapons, what's inside this package, but it's not only small arms, but some heavy weapons as well. And besides, Australia negotiates with other countries and makes joint support packages for Ukraine, so we are very grateful for that.
Mr. President, we know you have many calls on your time, so thank you for speaking to the Institute this evening. You said you take your inspiration from history. We take our inspiration from you. You've told us that you need Australian volunteers, so count on it. I will speak to your excellent ambassador to see if there's anything that the Lowy Institute can do to contribute to civil society and our counterparts in Ukraine. We look forward very much to the day when you can visit the Lowy Institute in Bligh Street in person and tell us how you won the war. In the meantime, let me paraphrase, if I may, the great American presidential envoy Harry Hopkins, writing to Winston Churchill in 1941 when the United Kingdom was living under the shadow of invasion. I wish you great and good luck, confusion to your enemies, and victory for Ukraine. President Zelensky, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for these words of the victory. And I also believe this is going to be a victory that is important for the whole world, and not only to Ukraine. And that is why the whole world is assisting us. Thank you. Peace to you.
Thank you. Well, that was quite an experience. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, both here at Bligh Street and at home online for this special event with the Lion of Kyiv, His Excellency President Volodymyr Zelensky. Thank you and good evening.